In every man's life, there comes a moment when the world tilts, when a glance, a silence, a subtle withdrawal from a woman leaves him gasping, bewildered, caught in an invisible snare. He feels the sudden coldness of her absence, though she sits right beside him. He senses the shifting tides of attention, the inexplicable withholding of warmth, the deliberate ambiguity that unsettles his core. And it is here, in this unspoken theater of tension, that most men stumble. They plead, they question, they break themselves against the wall of her silence, never realizing that what they are facing is not random cruelty, but a silent game as old as power itself. Machiavelli saw this game not in the realm of romance, but in the courts of princes, in the chambers where alliances were forged and broken, where gestures and silences carried more weight than declarations. His genius was to reveal that power is never what it appears to be. Power hides, masks, conceals. And so too in the dynamics between man and woman. Every woman plays this silent game, testing, probing, withholding. Not because she is malicious, but because she instinctively moves in the currents of power. The promise is this: if you can learn to read this silence, if you can master the art of not collapsing in the void of her ambiguity, you transform from pawn to player, from the supplicant begging for affection to the sovereign who commands respect without ever raising his voice. This is the thesis. The silent game is real. It is everywhere, and the man who fails to understand it becomes its victim, while the man who sees it for what it is becomes untouchable. Machiavelli's core insight was brutal and liberating. He taught that the world is not governed by morality, but by necessity, not by ideals, but by the ruthless currents of power. Appearances matter more than truth. Perception matters more than reality. To be loved is desirable, but to be feared is safer. Translated into the language of masculine and feminine dynamics, this means that your value in her eyes is not measured by how much you declare your love, not by how much you sacrifice, not even by how much you prove your loyalty. It is measured by how much you hold yourself as sovereign, how unshaken you remain when she withdraws her warmth to see if you will crumble. The silent game is her tool, her instinctive Machiavellian maneuver. She withholds attention to magnify her value. She creates distance to test the strength of your presence. She cloaks her desires in ambiguity so that you will reveal yours first. It is the same pattern the cunning prince would use in court. Reveal nothing, force the other to overextend, and in his desperation, expose his weakness. Most men respond to this silence with the collapse of the self. They chase after her words. They send desperate messages, searching for reassurance. They read into every pause as an accusation against their worth. And by doing so, they hand over the throne of power. They announce that their center lies not within, but in her approval. And once this is revealed, the game is lost. For Machiavelli taught that a prince who cannot conceal his needs, who reveals his dependence on others, invites manipulation, betrayal, and eventual ruin. The man who collapses in the silence of the woman repeats the same mistake. He shows that his kingdom is hollow, that his sovereignty is fragile, that he is a ruler begging for permission to rule. The alternative is the power response. It is not aggression, not cruelty, not cold indifference for its own sake. It is the calm mastery of presence. It is the ability to stand unmoved in the storm of her silence, to receive her withdrawal not as a wound, but as an opportunity to demonstrate that your foundation is unshakable. You do not chase. You do not explain. You do not surrender your frame. Instead, you allow the silence to become your ally. Just as Machiavelli advised princes to control appearances, you present yourself as composed, engaged in your mission, sovereign in your direction. She feels your strength not in pleading words, but in the very absence of collapse. In this way, her test is reversed. The silence she thought would expose you only reveals her own restlessness. You transform the game, not by refusing to play, but by mastering its deeper logic. This shift in perception is the alchemy. The silence is no longer a threat. It is a signal. It is not the withdrawal of love, but the natural pulse of power dynamics. Every woman plays it, not because she consciously plots, but because nature itself wired her to verify your sovereignty, to see if your crown is made of gold or of tin. The man who understands this never panics. He knows that the silence is not the end. It is the mirror. And in that mirror, either he sees his own desperation laid bare, or he sees his calm dominion reflected back. In this recognition, he ceases to be a victim of her ambiguity. He becomes its interpreter, its master. He reads the hidden code and responds not with weakness, but with regal composure. Thus the silent game is not something to resent, but something to revere. It is the crucible in which sovereignty is tested. It is the battlefield where the weak are separated from the strong, where the pretender is exposed and the true sovereign is crowned. The final lesson is simple yet severe. In love as in politics, power does not forgive the man who shows his need too quickly, but it bows before the man who, even in silence, radiates the certainty of his throne. Machiavelli's ghost whispers across centuries. If you would not be ruled, learn to master appearances. And in the theater of masculine and feminine, appearance is not deception. It is revelation. It is the unveiling of the inner empire. The choice stands before every man. Remain the pawn who breaks under silence, or ascend as the prince who turns silence into the stage of his sovereignty. The silence of a woman is not emptiness. It is not the absence of communication. It is communication in its most brutal, distilled form. A look away, a pause before replying, a delayed message, a cool tone that cuts where warmth once existed. These are not accidents. They are maneuvers. They are her equivalent of Machiavelli's counsel to princes. Never reveal the depths of your intentions. Always keep the other uncertain. Always preserve the ability to reverse course without warning. The man who does not understand imagines he is in a simple exchange of affection. He believes her withdrawal is merely mood, or fatigue, or chance. But underneath, her instinct is testing, gauging, watching with the cold precision of nature itself. She wants to know if your presence is real. She wants to know if your kingdom collapses when her eyes no longer rest on you. And here lies the tragedy for so many men. They mistake the silent game as rejection. They see her pauses as proof that they are unloved, unwanted, discarded. And so they beg, they plead, they claw at the air, trying to resurrect the warmth they fear they have lost. But the very act of clawing reveals their weakness. Machiavelli understood this pattern in rulers who sought love from their subjects at all costs. He wrote that a prince who leans on the affection of the people without fear will be abandoned the moment hardship arises, because affection is fleeting. What sustains respect is strength. What guarantees loyalty is the perception of unwavering command. In the same way, a woman's affection cannot be secured by pleading, cannot be preserved by sacrifice alone, cannot be kept alive by constant reassurance. What binds her is the gravity of your unshaken self, the magnetism of a man who does not lose himself, even when her light dims. Let us look deeper at why her silence destabilizes you. It is because you have handed her the authority to validate your existence. If her eyes are soft, you are alive. If her words are sweet, you are powerful. If her attention is fixed on you, you feel like a king. But when she turns away, when she withholds, when she cloaks her true thoughts, your borrowed crown slips from your head. You reveal that you are never king at all, only a courtier desperate for the queen's approval. And in that revelation, she loses respect. For instinct tells her, if he collapses in my silence, how can he stand against the storms of the world? If he is undone by my pause, how will he hold steady when the true battles of life demand his strength? The power response is not arrogance. It is not to mock her silence, nor to retaliate with cruelty. The power response is to remain rooted, to let the silence pass over you like wind over stone, You acknowledge her withdrawal, but you do not panic. You recognize the ambiguity, but you do not unravel. You remain immersed in your mission, devoted to your path, centered in your authority. She begins to feel what Machiavelli taught, that true power is not the loud declaration, but the quiet certainty that radiates from a man who does not beg to be seen. And slowly, her silence becomes uncomfortable not for you, but for her. She senses that her test has failed, that you will not break, that she has not unseated your throne. And in that recognition, she returns, drawn back by the magnetic field of your sovereignty. This is the perception shift. To the uninitiated, her silence is punishment. To the sovereign man, her silence is the crucible in which he proves himself. He does not see it as rejection, but as a natural pulse of feminine instinct. He does not demand its end, because he knows that to demand is to confess dependence. He allows it to play out serene, unshaken, for he knows that the true test is not her words, but his own reaction. And in passing the test, he ascends. He transforms silence into proof of his composure, ambiguity into fuel for his gravity. Understand this. The silent game will never end. It is not something you beat once and for all. It is woven into the very fabric of human dynamics, because at its core, it is the eternal interplay of power and perception. Women play it instinctively, because it reveals the truth of the man before them. And you, as a man, must not despise it, but embrace it as the sharpening stone of your masculinity. Machiavelli would have called it fortuna, the unpredictable currents of chance and circumstance. He wrote that the prince must be both cautious and bold, both fox and lion, for fortuna favors those who seize control without collapsing in uncertainty. The silent game is fortuna in miniature, the unpredictable tide in the realm of intimacy. Your task is to meet it as the lion who does not flinch, and as the fox who understands its hidden logic. So when she grows quiet, do not flinch. When her warmth dims, do not panic. When her words fade, do not chase. Instead, remember the lesson whispered from the Renaissance. Power belongs to the man who can endure uncertainty without breaking, who can hold his sovereignty even when the world withholds its comfort. For in that silence, you are not losing her. You are being measured. And if you stand tall, if you refuse to surrender your throne, the game is not her victory. It is yours. Every silence is a battlefield, not one of swords and shields, but of nerves, patience, and presence. And like every battlefield, it does not forgive weakness. Machiavelli warned rulers that neutrality is death, that hesitation and indecision invite destruction from both sides. The same holds true here. When a woman plays her silent game, when she withdraws into ambiguity, the man who hesitates between collapse and composure always chooses collapse. He tries to half stand in sovereignty while still seeking validation. He tells himself he is strong, yet secretly crafts long explanations to justify himself. He says he will not chase, but still sends a soft message to test the waters. This halfway measure is transparent, and in the silent court of power, transparency is ruin. Machiavelli's warning echoes. Appearances must be managed ruthlessly. A man who appears uncertain invites contempt. A man who appears solid, even when shaken within, commands respect. To understand the silent game fully, you must accept that its purpose is not random cruelty. Its purpose is exposure. Silence is the X-ray of your masculinity. It reveals whether your inner frame is bone or straw. Women do not need to consciously calculate this instinct, performs the work. An instinct is merciless. If you crumble, she does not even need to think it through. She feels the shift in her body. Attraction drains. Respect vanishes. Where there was heat, there is now only pity, or worse, irritation. Why? Because nature itself designed her attraction to lock onto sovereignty, not supplication. She does not want to rule a hollow man, because a hollow man cannot protect, cannot lead, cannot even govern himself. This is why silence is more powerful than words. Words can deceive, smiles can mask, promises can be faked, but silence forces revelation. Silence strips away pretense and lays bare the architecture of the self. It is Machiavelli's insight applied to intimacy. The measure of a prince is not how he rules in peace, but how he holds himself in uncertainty when fortune turns against him. In the same way, the measure of a man is not how he thrives when her eyes shine with love, but how he stands when her warmth is withdrawn. Most men misunderstand this game because they believe the feminine seeks constant harmony. They think love means uninterrupted approval, endless reassurance, a soft bed of affection without challenge. But love, for the feminine, is not passive. It is dynamic. It tests. It probes. It verifies. Because only through verification can trust take root. Only through the fire of trials can sovereignty be proven real. And so the silent game is her unconscious way of asking the deepest question. Do you belong to yourself, or do you belong to me? The man who collapses answers, I belong to you. The man who stands answers, I belong to myself, and from that foundation I can truly choose you. Now hear the brutal truth. If you chase her in the silence, if you drown her with pleas and clarifications, you rob her of the very attraction you are trying to preserve. Machiavelli wrote that men ought either to be indulged or destroyed, for they will avenge slight offenses, but cannot avenge severe ones. Translate this. When you commit the small offense of chasing too soon, you diminish yourself just enough to lose her respect, yet not enough for her to end it immediately. She stays, but coldly. She lingers, but without desire. You find yourself in the worst position, tolerated but not wanted, present but not chosen. And there is no torment greater for a man than to be kept in orbit as a satellite, rather than ruling as the sun. But when you hold steady, when you do not collapse, you flip the script entirely. You force her to confront her own silence. You make her realize that the pause, the ambiguity, the withdrawal did not destabilize you. She sees that you are not leaning on her attention for oxygen. And in that moment, something shifts. Respect stirs. Curiosity grows. Her instinct whispers, here is a man who will not kneel, a man who can be trusted to stand when the storm arrives. And paradoxically, her silence becomes attraction reborn. The very test that could have buried you now elevates you, simply because you refuse to break. What does this mean for the man who seeks mastery? It means that your task is not to eliminate the silent game, but to train yourself to thrive within it. Just as Machiavelli taught princes to expect treachery, to plan for betrayal, to armor themselves against the fickleness of fortune, you too must expect silence. Plan for ambiguity, armor yourself against withdrawal. You must embrace the uncertainty not as an attack, but as the natural terrain of power dynamics. You must learn to walk calmly through the fog, knowing that your presence is enough, that your sovereignty does not need constant confirmation. Here is the paradox that every man must grasp. The more you demand clarity, the less you receive it. The more you beg for her warmth, the colder she becomes. But the more you relax into her silence, the quicker it melts. The more you remain absorbed in your mission, the more she leans back toward you. Power in relationships functions as Machiavelli described power in politics. It flows to the one who appears least dependent. It gravitates to the one who can endure isolation without breaking. And this is the secret. Sovereignty is not the absence of desire. It is the refusal to let desire consume your throne. So ask yourself, who are you in the silence? Are you the man whose heart races, whose hands shake, who reaches for the phone to send another message? Or are you the man who breathes deeply, continues his work, and waits with unbothered calm for her to reappear? The first is a courtier, begging to be noticed. The second is a prince, commanding attention without asking. The silent game exposes this choice every time. And know this, she is not your enemy. Her silence is not cruelty. It is the echo of nature's ancient demand that a man prove his strength. To resent it is to resent the very laws that shape attraction. To embrace it is to step into the eternal dance of masculine and feminine with eyes open. Machiavelli's wisdom was never about cynicism for its own sake. It was about clarity, to see human nature as it is, not as we wish it to be. And human nature has written this law in stone. Women will test, men will be measured, sovereignty will decide. When we trace the life of Machiavelli himself, we see the silent game written in flesh and blood. He was not always the cold adviser of princes, nor the detached strategist of power. He was once a man caught in the storms of politics, a servant of Florence, entrusted with delicate missions, negotiating between kings and popes, weaving alliances that could crumble with a single shift of fortune. And then, as fortune does, it turned against him. The Medici returned to power, and Machiavelli was stripped of his post, accused of conspiracy, tortured, and cast into exile. Imagine the silence that fell upon him then. Once courted, once respected, once in the inner circle of decision, and suddenly abandoned. Letters went unanswered, doors closed. Friends vanished into shadows. This was not merely political defeat. It was the void, the crushing ambiguity of isolation. But here lies the lesson. Machiavelli did not collapse. He did not beg his enemies for favor. He did not grovel for forgiveness. He endured the silence with grim patience, and in that crucible he wrote his masterpiece. The prince was not the product of triumph, but of exile. Not the fruit of applause, but of rejection. He turned silence into sovereignty, ambiguity into clarity. He carved power out of absence. In this, he becomes the perfect symbol for every man who faces the silent game. The woman who withdraws, the beloved who withholds, is a miniature of that exile. And your task, like Machiavelli's, is not to collapse, but to create. To turn the silence into the proving ground of your sovereignty. To write your own dominion out of the void. For if Machiavelli had begged, if he had wept for reinstatement, his name would be forgotten, dissolved into the dust of minor clerks. But because he endured, because he forged thought from torment, his name endures as a synonym for power itself. This is the path laid before you. To crumble in silence is to vanish. To stand in silence is to engrave yourself in history, or at least in her memory, as a man who does not fall when the lights go out. Now comes the final edict, the unavoidable verdict of this philosophy. Every woman plays this silent game, not out of malice, but out of instinct. And every man must face it, whether he acknowledges it or not. You cannot escape it. You cannot plead it away. You cannot legislate it into disappearance. It is woven into the dance of attraction, as inevitable as night following day. The only choice is how you will stand in that silence. You can collapse, reveal your desperation, and surrender your crown. Or you can remain sovereign, rooted in your mission, commanding without needing, choosing without begging. The first path is slavery. The second is rule. Machiavelli's whisper reaches across centuries. Appearances govern the world. Sovereignty is not declared. It is displayed. The man who crumbles in silence has displayed his unfitness to rule. The man who holds steady, who allows the silence to wash over him without shaking, displays his crown without speaking a word. And women, like nations, bend toward the gravity of sovereignty. They may resist, they may test, they may challenge, but in the end, they yield to the presence that does not yield. So the edict is this: stop asking when the silence will end. Stop begging for her words. Stop treating ambiguity as an enemy. Instead, embrace it as the mirror of your masculinity. Every time she withholds, see it as the arena. Every time she pauses, see it as the trial. Every time she grows cold, see it as the chance to prove that your fire does not depend on hers. If you pass the test, you rise. If you fail, you sink. There is no middle ground. This is the secret Machiavelli would demand you learn. Fortune favors the bold, but it also favors the sovereign. The woman who withdraws is fortune in disguise, and the man who bends to her silence is swallowed by it. But the man who stands becomes her axis, her anchor, her inevitable choice. For power always returns to the one who does not flinch. Now the decision stands before you. Will you continue as the pawn, forever undone by her silences, forever chasing approval, forever collapsing in ambiguity? Or will you ascend as the sovereign, turning every silence into the stage upon which your presence is revealed? The choice is not hers. It is yours. It always has been. And when you decide, when you finally choose sovereignty over collapse, you will discover the paradox at the heart of this game. The moment you no longer fear her silence, she will no longer be able to sustain it. For silence only rules the man who trembles. It dissolves before the man who does not. This is how you beat the game. This is how you rise beyond it. And this is how you become the prince in your own kingdom. Unshaken, untouchable, sovereign.